Hello everyone, my name is Jessa. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a bit of an update on a situation that I commented on earlier. If you have not already watched that video or heard of this situation, that I'm going to be talking today about the controversy surrounding Audra Winter in her book Age of Scorpius, particularly giving some updates on some recent developments in her publishing sort of journey around this book. So to sort of give a brief summary of the timeline of events and what's going on in case you don't know, Audra Winter is a debut author who self-published her book via TikTok shop and got very popular on TikTok. It sold about, I believe, 7,000 copies of her debut novel, which led her to founding a sort of startup company around her world that is called The World of Guardian LLC. Now, the controversy around this book started because Audra basically received a lot of negative reviews and feedback after the book was released, and it currently sits I think about a 1.6 rating on Goodreads, and it's kind of been changing back and forth largely because I think a lot of reviews are being deleted or very closely monitored because they want to make sure that the reviews on that book are actually authentic instead of just people jumping and hate piling on it, which I think is a valid thing to do. Review sites should be for actual authentic reviews of the actual product. It's also caught a lot of attention as well because Audra had a very negative reaction to a lot of this feedback, which resulted in her making some really not okay remarks towards readers and also just on her public platform in general. I talked more about that in my initial first video, which I'm going to link below so that you can watch it. That will give more of an overview. I will also include some videos linked down below that I think offer a more comprehensible view of the events and sort of timeline, as I'm not really interested in doing that in this video. The intention behind this video is more so to give an update on certain specific developments that have happened, namely the fact that Audra has begun working on her second revised edition of this book, which she has now decided to post publicly on Patreon with the initial declaration that this would be free, and now she is only going to be offering this to paying members. Now, this has caught a lot of attention from people, including myself, because Audra has already published a book that she sold to consumers that failed to deliver on the initial promises she made when marketing that book. And so people are already very upset about the fact that they spent money on this book that was not worth the money that they spent for most people. And now that she has decided to make something that she was initially offering to be free, largely in order to prove that she was actually actively working on improving her book to the audience who was already financially supported her, that she failed to deliver the initial product that she marketed towards them. So now that she has decided to charge an additional cost towards this book has obviously caught a lot of flack. I personally agree with a lot of the criticisms against this and want to provide a bit more commentary on why I think this sort of modality of publishing or sort of editing is largely problematic in a variety of different ways. Obviously, there's the monetary concern about it. Audra has been accused multiple times of being manipulative, scamming, grifting, everything within that kind of category. I don't necessarily know how well founded those claims are. I think it's up to individual interpretation. I'm personally not comfortable making any definitive claims about what it is she's doing. I do think that what she is doing is definitely concerning and makes me very skeptical about whether her intentions behind writing a book and trying to get it published is even authentic in the first place, because to me a lot of her actions seem to point that she is more interested in making money rather than actually delivering a successful book project. And I think her whole sort of idea of starting a multimedia company in general kind of substantiates that, and I did comment on that in my first video. I personally really don't understand the logic behind trying to set up an entire multimedia company behind a book that doesn't even exist. I think that, yes, it's good to dream big and have ambitions, but I do think that your ambitions need to be grounded in factual reality and what is physically possible for you to achieve, and delineate it in a step-by-step process, as opposed to I'm just going to try and do everything all at once. It's not a good practice, I think, for anyone to do, much less someone who is very young like she is. Another concern that I had about it as well, and this is something that I once again brought up in the previous video, is that Audra has largely seemed to surround herself with a community of what is called yes men, or basically people who just agree with everything that she wants to do. And recently there was a post on this Patreon where when they were giving updates about now wanted to charge people to get access to the revised chapters of this book, had also included that they were going to be limiting comments from people that are giving constructive criticism. And in particular, the wording of this is kind of weird. They use the term critical feedback a lot, and I feel like that can apply to really like anything. I'm going to read off this update that was given on September 3rd. Hello everyone, Yarros here. After much internal discussion, we decided on a new rule. We will no longer be accepting critiques on this page. We have heard a great deal of feedback from readers both here and on other social media. Some has been respectful and appreciated, some less so. There comes a time when the deluge is no longer helpful and the comments section has begun to resemble a public critique workshop. There is no possible way to meet every reader's requests, suggestions, and individual tastes. We are a team of professionals and we have specific creative visions to pursue. When we're ready for outside feedback on the revised edition, we will recruit beta readers. Rest assured that this Patreon will be one of the places we source such readers when the time comes. In the meantime, if you want to discuss your critical thoughts on the Age of Scorpius or its author, there are many places to do that elsewhere. We will now be deleting any comments with unsolicited advice or critique. If someone repeatedly violates this rule, they will be banned. I understand this may seem harsh to some, particularly in light of the problems in the first edition, but it is not a norm in any creative industry to bombard an artist with an avalanche of unasked for critique. It has become so severe across multiple platforms that it has interfered with Audra's motivation and morale. To make the book that we all want to see, we need to close the windows for a while and focus. Updates on revision process, world building, and art will continue, but this is going to be a space for discussion, questions, and appreciation, not critical feedback or advice on our process. If there comes a time when we want that, we will explicitly ask for it. This is an important boundary during a storm of bad press. If after reading this you decide to stick around for the journey ahead, you have my deepest gratitude. So overall, I don't necessarily think that the statement is completely bad, but there is a couple of things that are really pointing out for me. The first one is the discussion around beta readers, going back to that discussion earlier about how Audra has surrounded herself with people who are yes men, who are just approving whatever she wants. I think that this statement of saying we're going to be choosing our beta readers from a pool of people who have already pledged financial support to the project does indeed show that she's only choosing people who are going to support her. And the fact that she is also trying to, or the team rather, is trying to delete and get rid of any comments that could potentially be viewed as critical also shows that they are quite literally trying to create an entire community where everyone is agreeing on things. Which brings me to my second point, which is a statement that says, updates on revision process, world building, and art will continue, but this is going to be a space for discussion, questions, and appreciation, not critical feedback or advice on our process. And I think the main kind of highlight that I want to add is the two words of discussion and appreciation. What this says to me is that what they are looking for is for people who only appreciate their work, which is, in my opinion, personally antithetical to the notion of what discussion is meant to be, which is meant to be people discussing different opinions and providing feedback and having what can be interpreted as arguments with one another. Now, I don't necessarily think that discussion or arguments or debates or whatever need to be mean. I think that there is 100% a space to disagree and agree with people and do so in a respectful manner. I do understand that most people have not been respectful to Audra and her team and that they probably do want to limit those comments, but you can't just say that someone who is actually leaving a very thoughtful and insightful critique that is genuinely wants to help you improve is being mean-spirited in their critiques. It's because just the whole mindset behind this is just very negative, and I think all that it's going to serve is to harm Audra's ability to actually interact respectfully with critiques and feedback, because the only people that she has shown herself to be willing to accept critiques and feedback from is people that she is either being paid to listen to or is paying for their services, such as the editor that she's hired. Which leaves us with the perfect segue to actually discuss the editor themselves, because I really am not a fan of what I've seen so far from this editor. To kind of give a brief summary of what's been going on in the editing kind of subfield of this grand controversy, the big issue with the original book was that people were like, this book was not well edited at all, because there's no way that this should have been published in the first place. This has been a very big topic of discussion because Audra explicitly marketed her book as having been edited by several accomplished editors, including one of the editors behind The Hunger Games. Now, I've actually read a separate article, which I'm going to link below, that actually discussed how some of the marketing around editors can be very misleading, because saying my book was edited by the editor of The Hunger Games can mean that it was edited by an editor who worked on something such as the Russian translation of The Hunger Games, and thus really had no role in the actual success of that product. I don't actually know who the editor of Audra's book is or what this editor did, but I do know that Audra has made several claims throwing these editors under the bus, which I personally think is very irresponsible on her part and very not respectful of the other people who have helped her or wanted to help her. I personally don't think that this is a good look to have, to be publicly trashing people that you have worked with previously, and that sort of alludes to what has been going on with this new editor that she hired as well. Originally, there was some controversy about Audra hiring a new editor because initially she announced that she was seeking an editor from her audience. It seems like this person that she has hired is not from her original audience, and I do think that is quite interesting. However, this has led me to having some even more negative thoughts about the editor that I will get into later. But basically, there was a post, I believe it was on August 25th, that was a Q&A with Audra and the editor. And there has been a separate kind of controversy that has come out of this, because the editor in one of their questions was basically trashing other fantasy authors. So I'm going to read off this particular part to you guys because I personally think it's really important and want to discuss this further. So the question that is asked is, what are your editor's credentials and portfolio of prior edited works? I was curious and read Caitlin's Substack article called From Amateur to Author. Would Caitlin categorize Age of Scorpius as similar to those amateurish romantasy books named such as Powerless and Fourth Wing? I want to start off by saying that I think this is a very respectful and well done question. I did try and find this article From Amateur to Author, and I was unable to find it because it has been deleted. I was able to find the Substack page for this editor. There are no posts on it anymore. I personally want to still respect the editor's privacy, so I'm not going to comment much more on it. Then the answer starts with, given the virality and amount of private information being shared right now, I'm not comfortable discussing myself. I realize that sounds like a cop-out, but I'm a private person to begin with and actively avoid social media. I hadn't even heard of Age of Scorpius until a client brought it to my attention. I'm not here for recognition, I'm here to give disappointed readers the novel they were promised. As far as my credential goes, I have multiple writing degrees, including both a technical writing degree and a Master of Fine Arts in Writing, rather than just creative writing. An MFA is a terminal degree for writing, although some universities offer PhDs, and is required to teach at a collegiate level. During my studies, I worked directly under multiple award-winning authors, was awarded a mentorship with a publishing professional, and did 2 theses, 1 work of fiction, 1 work of nonfiction. I've also worked at an independent publishing house. I'm currently in the process of applying for PhD programs, though the academic landscape is tenuous right now that I don't expect anything to come out of it. Age of Scorpius is a strange case. Audra has spent a lot of time building up the novel, whereas books like Powerless or Fourth Wing haven't. Audra has also spent a lot of time reading within the genre she is writing, and I would argue that Yarros, at least, has not. But coming up with an idea and fleshing out the world and communicating the idea are two different skills. Understanding the elements of story and implementing them are two different skills. One of the goals in working with Audra on this manuscript is to bridge the gap between what she's trying to convey and what the reader is receiving. She's an expert in the world and understands the genre she's writing, but needs to work on distilling that all into a cohesive narrative. It doesn't matter how fleshed out a fantasy novel is if the reader doesn't understand it. It's sort of the inverse of Fourth Wing or Powerless in that regard. Readers who love those titles really connected with the characters and the voice, while critics point out the flaws in the world. With Age of Scorpius, readers are unable to connect with the characters and the voice due to the prose, and then because of the development issues, the world building does not come through. I think what she's saying about Audra is true, that Age of Scorpius, because of the lackluster prose, people aren't able to connect with the characters, and thus, because of other developmental issues, the world building doesn't come through. I think she's right in saying that. However, I do not like that she is trying to throw other authors like Lauren Roberts and Rebecca Yarros in particular under the bus. Rebecca Yarros in particular is someone with decades of experience within the literary field. Yes, she is not primarily a fantasy author. She has written romance novels and has made her segue into the romantasy genre with Fourth Wing. I still think she has a far better understanding of narrative structure and narrative techniques than Audra does. I haven't read Age of Scorpius, but I have watched videos where people have read the book and are picking apart parts of the world building in prose. And I will link some of those videos down below in case you want to watch it as well. But I really do not think that it is a good look to be tearing down two authors. Even though I haven't read the book Powerless and I'm personally not interested in reading it just because it doesn't interest me, and also other concerns that I've heard about the topic of plagiarism with that book, which I'm not going to get into right now. But I think that Lauren Roberts is actually someone that Audra should be looking as a role model for her career, because they do have a very similar pathway to success, so to speak, because Lauren Roberts is also someone who went viral on TikTok for her book idea and then was able to self-publish it and then traditionally publish it, and has made a pretty successful start for herself in publishing. Once again, I'm not interested in reading her books. They don't personally appeal to me, but she has had more success than Audra has, and I don't think that it is a good look to be tearing down those authors or hiring someone who has targeted and made negative comments about those authors to work on your book when your product has received far more negative critiques than either of their products have. Now, that isn't to say that Roberts or Yarros should not be criticized. I do think that there is a way to criticize these authors, and once again, I said that I'm not interested in reading Lauren Roberts because there have been, in my opinion, very valid allegations made against her for plagiarizing the Red Queen series. And while I have read Rebecca Yarros' Fourth Wing series, it isn't one of my favorites. I did enjoy the first book, but I personally think that there's a lot of issues with the world building, but I don't think that it is a series that deserves as much hate as it does get. From my standpoint, I will always be a defender of Fourth Wing, largely because I've seen how many people have come into the sort of fantasy genre and started to read in that genre because they've enjoyed Fourth Wing so much, and so I will always defend that title and defend people who like it, largely from the perspective that for most people it has been their gateway to fantasy, and I think that we should be encouraging people to pick up titles outside of their traditional genres, and that these genres such as romantasy that blend more of a traditional romance story arc in a fantasy world shouldn't be villainized just because they're different than the standard fantasy novel. I think that there is a space for both to exist, and I do think that the romantasy genre as a whole has allowed for this kind of mixing of genres and also a mixing of audiences that has allowed a lot of people to broaden their horizons in terms of the books that they are reading and picking up. I do, however, think that there are some valid concerns about romantasy books that I won't be touching on in this video just because this isn't what it's supposed to be about, but I do have plans to film more videos talking about some of the issues that I do have with the romantasy genre and some of the marketing behind it, so feel free to stay tuned and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more about that. All of this is to say that I don't think that this is a good look for Audra and her editor to have publicly made negative statements statements about other individuals within the field that you're actively trying to pursue a career in. And I think that her deflection, particularly about concerns that readers have about asking, why are you taking on this project, Age of Scorpius, when you've criticized other authors for writing amateur fantasy that is largely better than what this product is. And I think it actually points out how this editor is very hypocritical in her notions of what project she's decided to take on, and makes me rather curious as to what are the editor's intentions in taking on this project, specifically because while I do respect both Audra and the editor's desire for privacy, I think that if you are specifically marketing yourself based on your accomplishments, such as the publishing house that you used to work on, or the degrees that you have, or experience working on certain specific projects, that you do have a responsibility to provide actual evidence to support those claims. And I think that this is particularly important in this case of the Age of Scorpius, largely because Audra has made some very false claims and embellished a lot of details within her marketing around this book that has resulted in this situation in the first place, such as her claims that her book was edited by the Hunger Games editor without actually giving detail into who that editor was and what type of editing that they did, and whether or not she actually actively listened and applied feedback and critiques into her book. She's also claimed to be an owner of a six-figure business, which was based on the fact that she sold a lot of pre-orders, but a lot of her actions now have shown that she has not been able to actually keep up that money, because all she has done is produce one singular project that she has sunken a lot more money than she has made out of it, which is supported by the fact that we now know that she is seeking investors for her project, and is also seeking now to charge money for Patreon things that she wasn't before. So this shows, while she might own a six-figure business, she certainly does not successfully run one. What we've seen is multiple times that Audra has made false claims that perhaps she herself did not perceive to be false, so thus does bring up some questions about whether or not she is being intentionally manipulative, or whether or not she just has a lot of audacity and has a big ego, which I actually think is the more likely thing, but I do understand people who see the other side. So I think that there is a responsibility for this editor to somewhat give information about herself to actually validate these claims, because for all we know, she could just be making up these things, because Audra herself has made up a lot of things, and it wouldn't surprise me to know that the person that she is working with is also doing that as well. Another kind of thing sort of similar to the lack of detail about this author is that I personally feel like she's refusing to give detail about herself because she doesn't want her name to be associated with this project. If I was an editor and I was working on a project that I was genuinely passionate about and wanted to support that author, I would want to name what that project is, name the author, and share it with everyone so that they could also support this project, especially if it was one that I was very passionate about. So the fact that Caitlin wants to keep herself anonymous kind of makes me feel like she's ashamed or somewhat worried about having her name associated with this project, which to me shows that she's not as invested in the actual success of it as she claims. Now, I still think that there is a way to keep your privacy. You know, if you're trying to become an editor, you should have some sort of like a webpage or LinkedIn sort of address that people can access so that they can interact with you and the books that you're working on. And the fact that she even acknowledges that this is a very viral situation, I just feel, especially because we've seen how irresponsible Audra has been with her money in the past, that this editor might just be in it to get money from Audra. I don't necessarily know if that is 100% true, and it is very, very difficult to make claims of such a magnitude based on very little information, but to me, this personally just seems very iffy and off at the moment. Audra has shown herself to be very naive and someone who's very wishy-washy with her money, which is proven by the fact that, once again, that she is now searching for investors for her project when she claims to have made 6 figures from it, which does mean that within the past half year or so, I think the book only went up for pre-order maybe in May. So from May to now September, she has already gone through most of that money, which is multiple $100,000, with the investors, like in particular, providing a detail of $200,000, which if you've gone through $200,000 in like 4 months, that to me just shows that you're irresponsible with dealing with things. And I don't even know what else to say on that matter. Some people, I think, in comments have been sharing that Audra has been posting like videos on her TikTok saying that she like no longer has enough money for rent or food and that she's out of school. And I do have sympathy for the fact that she's going through all that, because I don't personally believe that anyone should ever have to be homeless or not have food or not have access to education. I feel like those things should be basic human rights, and I'm not willing to argue with anyone over those things. Those are just basic human rights. But the fact that she has made this money and has used it irresponsibly, I do think points towards her not being very mature and not being the best person to be handling these decisions, and also someone who could be very easily manipulated by people looking to make money off of her, which I do think is possibly, not definitively, what could be happening with the situation with the editor. Now, the first chapter of the revised second edition of the Age of Scorpius was actually made available to the public Patreon prior to them introducing these new, like, paid for tiers. And I did actually have the chance to read through it, and also read through the comments section prior to them making the change to their comments policy. And I can tell you definitively that they removed almost every single comment, including ones that were worded very nicely, about giving critiques and advice for this revised chapter. As it stands now, there's only about 10 comments on it, and every single one basically is positive. The first one is basically, "This is a great start, keep on working." The second comment, "Definitely an improvement over the first version." This person does actually leave some critiques, largely about the environment, that is still included within there, so doesn't seem like they're removing every single negative comment, but I don't think that that one is even negative. It's giving a very thoughtful critique about, I think all of those comments are nice and stuff like that. It's just kind of surprising, because there was like one comment that I remember reading through that I actually thought was very well worded about giving some critiques on the actual writing itself, because let's just say it's still not good. I don't want to be like too negative, and I don't want to be one of those people giving like a step-by-step line edit, but some of the issues that I personally found with this were repetition, and repetitive use of alliteration came up a lot. Like, this is on the very first page. I'll include a picture of it. "Evidence of human presence dwelled in the depths of the forest, where spears and shields rested amongst flourishing sword ferns." So what we see is "dwelled in the depths of the forest" and "spear, shields, and sword" all in the same sentence. So we have 2 instances of alliteration, one being 2 and the other being 3. There's also a lot of filler words in there, like "dwelled in the depths of the forest" can easily be "dwelling in the depths of the forest" instead of "dwelled in the depths of the forest." It's also a weird sort of mix of both past and active text, like "evidence of human presence dwelled" versus "amongst flourishing sword ferns." So you have a past tense in the dwelled versus the active tense of the flourishing, which kind of creates a bit of like a dichotomy. There's also a lot of this throughout the text, such as was believed or stuff like that. And I don't necessarily think that that is like a negative thing per se, but it is something that jumps out to me if I'm kind of putting on my editor cap, is like there's also just a lot of really info dumpy world building still, in my opinion. It's talking a lot about the Conviction Woods and how there was all these tales and stories about Conviction Woods, but it's like nothing really makes sense. Like she goes on this whole tangent about like storytellers and how when they talk about Conviction Woods they take on a more somber sort of grief filled tone, and it just doesn't really make sense because it is taking you out of the active action of what's going on in the scene. Like we really don't even get the character making active decisions and choices until literally the 3rd page. It was still just like, I was walking down this path, I wanted to do this thing, but I couldn't do this thing. Describing what is going to happen instead of actually showing you what is actually happening. So it's very much the telling it to you instead of showing it. Once again, just aspects of clunky writing, and it just, while I didn't read the first edition, this still feels very clunky and amateur in my opinion. I just don't like how this is shaping up to look, and I think the fact that they're deleting the comments actually giving feedback about it is only going to result in this continuing to happen, because I don't see how the writing quality in this is going to actually produce a good book looking forward. Personally, I don't think that there has been many improvements. I can see that there is at least an attempt to make improvements, but if you are making the choice to publish something on a public platform and you're doing it with the express intention of trying to placate the people who have already financially supported your company and your product, and you fail to deliver on it, and now you are going to charge them even more money to get access to that content that you initially promised them for free as recompense for the failure to deliver on that initial project. And on top of that, you are actively silencing their voices when they are giving you thoughtful critiques that can help you to improve and create a version of that story that is actually in line with what it should have been initially. It just seems really strange to me. Because why are you actually doing this whole thing with Patreon in the first place if the intention behind it is not to actually receive feedback from the consumer market, but just to share it? And for what purpose? To get people to leave nice comments on it? That is just working to slowly validate even more so the already sort of delusional framework that you've built around a notion of your own brilliance in writing. So it really doesn't seem good to me. It sort of kind of reminds me of like fan fiction and sort of like online writing communities, like things like Wattpad and Royal Road. And it kind of makes me wonder as to why Audra has decided to go the Patreon route. And I think that why she has decided to go the Patreon route is to potentially get money out of people, because there really isn't any reason why this can't have gone onto something like Wattpad, which is a more typical platform for self-published books of this caliber to sort of go on to. And a lot of the early criticism about this was like, I've read books better than this on Wattpad, that a lot of people have been saying, and I do understand that a lot of those comments are made in humor. But I personally don't think that there's anything negative about publishing something on a site like Wattpad and Royal Road. I think that they offer some very good tools for people to build writing skills and to also begin interacting with a community, and for people to also give feedback towards authors as well. There's also been several examples of successful authors who have come from sites like Wattpad and Royal Road, and even I think possibly WordPress was maybe another one, because I know Sarah J. Maas initially published Throne of Glass through one of these sort of sites as well. Sort of branching off about the initial conversation around Audra's decision to publish a second edition of the Age of Scorpius, I also wanted to talk a little bit about some thoughts that I had about second edition publishing at large. Because I have noticed as of recently that there has been quite a significant uptick in the amount of second edition published books that are coming out. I have some complicated thoughts on this matter. The first way that I think second edition publishing has been coming out is largely through self-published books that have been picked up now for traditional publishing. I think in most instances this is quite valid, and the whole concept behind second edition publishing is largely to give these self-published authors the resources and backing of a traditional publishing house that they did not have before. So this would include doing more edits to the story that might see the story actually be significantly shorter, or maybe certain details be edited out, or maybe certain phrases be edited out based on whether or not they're socially appropriate, or if the publishing house wants that kind of material within their book. There have been some pretty popular examples of this happening. I feel like the big first book that this happened to was the Atlas 6 by Oliver Blake, which was initially self-published and then picked up by a traditional publisher, and then books 1, 2, and 3 all came out with that traditional publishing, so there isn't any self-published edition of either books 2 or 3. I haven't personally read this book, though I do actually have both editions, so I think it would be kind of interesting to do maybe a comparison of that if people are interested. Some other books, Carissa Broadbent, for example, is an author that's been picked up recently. I haven't heard a lot of critiques sort of about the Serpent and the Wings of Night series being edited. However, her second series, Daughter of No Worlds, has also recently been picked up for traditional publication, and it's gotten new covers, which people are upset about because they don't like them. I'm personally in that camp myself. I have the first and the third book and don't have the second one, and the second book is actually selling for a pretty substantial amount online because of its relative rarity in comparison. Another book that's coming to mind is a book called Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling. And this is one that I think offers a really interesting look because the traditionally published version is about half the size of the self-published edition. And I've seen some mixed opinions on this. Some people have said that they actually preferred the original edition, though I've also seen people say that they didn't like the original edition because it was way too long and way overblown and that it could have been further edited, which been done with the traditional published version. So I think that one highlights the kind of significant changes that can happen. And I don't necessarily think that this is a bad thing, but I do think that it is interesting that the self-published market is almost sort of, I don't want to say collapsing in on itself, but it is slowly being almost subsumed within the traditional publishing sphere. And I feel like there are possibly some authors as well who might be self-publishing in hopes that they can get traditionally published instead of going the route of trying to get traditionally published in the first place, which I kind of feel is a little bit maybe what Audra was trying to do, is that she was trying to sort of publish her own book and possibly have it get picked up by a publisher instead of actually, because originally she had been working with a publishing agency and showed that she wasn't willing to make the needed changes to accommodate what they asked of her. I do think that overall this change has allowed for a lot more authors to get traditional publishing deals and get more attention that their books would not have received otherwise. So I do largely think that I am in support of this, and I have really enjoyed seeing authors that I've supported as self-published authors get picked up by traditional publishing houses, because I know that this will be a benefit to them in their career and helps them to have a more stable source of income and possibly a brighter future for their career ahead. However, this has also led towards a separate sort of phenomenon where traditionally published books are now getting second editions. Now, some of these are just changes in the cosmetics of the book, such as new covers or possibly an illustrated special edition. And sometimes this is done for completely published series. Other times it's done for series that are still in the process of being published, which I think has generated a lot more controversy because there have been books that have been released with one set of covers, and then when book 2 comes out, it has a different cover. So one example that's kind of coming to mind is the book The Will of the Many by James Islington. This one was very popular when it came out, and so it recently got a second edition. The second book is being published soon, and it's going to follow the look of the second edition. So a lot of people who were early supporters of the series are upset about the fact that this first edition looks different than the second edition. Personally, I can understand a lot of that frustration because the cover is a completely different design, and it also has a sprayed edge. And while it is just a cosmetic thing, I do understand why it bothers people, and it bothers me as well, even though I actually bought both editions, which is it's probably more so a problem with me. But there's also been instances where series are now being re-released. So I think one that's coming to mind is the Blood Sworn Saga by John Gwynne, which is getting these new sort of fancy edges and I think some maybe end paper designs. This one I think is also really interesting because from what I recall, I actually think that John Gwynne's books, at least here in North America, were not published in hardcover as their first editions. I've heard a lot of people discussing the fact that that hardcovers are very hard to find of his books. I think that potentially this is actually a good decision on the choice of the publisher in terms of the fact that there wasn't a hardcover edition and there is definitely a demand for that hardcover edition. So again, the series is already completed. People who bought it previously, such as buying the first book when it first came out, can still get the completed paperback set of them. They now just have the option to get these special hardcovers. So I think that this is a better way of doing it than what's happened with the situation with the Will of the Many series, because it gives the consumer the choice on whether or not they want to purchase the new editions and still be able to have a matching set regardless of the choice that they make. And then there's also a third way that this has been happening, which is where not only are the covers or the exterior of the book being updated, but some books have actually updated the interior content as well. So I think the most popular example of this has been the Bone Season series by Samantha Shannon. I have not read the Bone Season series. I am interested in reading it, and I do have the first book in this revised edition. However, I kind of have a bit of mixed opinions about this because from what it seems, there have been very significant changes made to the actual events that occur in the storyline, with the author themselves deciding they wanted to make these changes and that they did not see a reason to continue the series as it was. I actually think now the revised editions have all been published. I believe there's 4 of them, and that the 5th book, which would be the first actual new book in the series, is coming out soon as well. I do think it is a bit of almost a slap in the face, metaphorically, to readers that have been with the series from the beginning, because now if they want to continue the series, they have to reread these new editions and potentially purchase them as well, which thus makes their old copies that they already spent, time and money and effort either purchasing or reading almost useless. I do still think because of the sort of secondhand book market that there is some value. I personally think that if I were a fan of the original Bone Season series, that I would be upset about this decision on both the author and the publishing house's front, because books are expensive, especially hardcover books, and these books are being released as hardcover first. So if you'd like to read them as they're coming out. I live in Canada, so hardcovers are about $40. It's gonna cost you about $160 just to get the first 4. And that's quite a lot of money, especially if you've already invested money into that series as well, because part of the value in actually purchasing a book is the fact that you can reread it at any time you choose. But if that series is no longer relevant because it's been revised and adapted and changed, it sort of makes that utility no longer there. Well, I don't want to rag on authors like Samantha Shannon or other authors who have done this, because I do know that there's some other examples. I do think that it is something to be a bit concerned about, especially from the point of view of the consumer, because whether we like it or not, publishing houses at the end of the day are companies that want to make money off of products. And that's sort of similar to this whole conversation about Audra's book, is that ultimately you want to make money off of the product, which is why she's making all these weird decisions about trying to start a Patreon and trying to make a separate edition and doing all this extra stuff that honestly is very superfluous when the focus should be on actually writing the book, is because it's motivated by a desire to have money. So I do think that it is something to be wary about, especially wary about the support that we are putting behind these books, because if something like Samantha Shannon's Bone Season series becomes super popular and everyone is forced to buy these new revised editions, an additional surge in the popularity of her work, I do think it's very possible that other authors will be like, hey, maybe I should go back and rewrite this novel that I published 15 years ago. And I don't think that that's necessarily always a harmful thing. Like, once again, there's a lot of different issues with self-publishing. A lot of authors feel very pressured to write towards certain trends within the literary marketplace, so maybe going back and revising their work allows them to sort of explore different avenues and create a story that is more authentic to what they initially wanted. But I do think that this more so points to issues in our publishing industry at large, where it sort of just feels like creativity and doing something that is unique and interesting and new is punished because it's not as marketable. But now that you've established that you have some sort of marketability, you're allowed to do those more creative and unique things, which I just think bodes negatively looking forward at publishing as a creative industry rather than strictly from a financial standpoint. Now, obviously the situation with Audra seeking to publish a second edition of the book is a lot different than a lot of these other authors seeking to publish second editions, because most of the times they do have the support of the traditional publishing house behind them, as opposed to looking to do it on their own. I think publishing a second edition as a self-published author is a very odd thing to happen, and I think that this only kind of serves to almost legitimize like not putting as much work and effort into a self-published work as you would a traditionally published one, which I think sets a very negative sort of stereotype about self-publishing as an industry. And I really do hope that this doesn't negatively affect other aspiring authors as well. I talked a lot in my initial video about my fears regarding how Audra's comments about excusing her poor writing as part of being neurodivergent has, in my opinion, promoted ableist rhetoric and will probably serve to harm the disabled community, especially disabled and neurodivergent authors. I can see how this fiasco as well will also serve to harm the self-publishing industry, and especially young authors trying to break through in those markets, and also authors who are looking to do something unique. I feel like overall this is just a really sad situation, and I feel as things have been going on that it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. Like every update I feel like I'm almost just dreading what's going to come out about it, because I don't wish any of this negative things to happen to anyone, and I do think that Audra does have a lot of passion for her project, but her efforts to market it and talk about it and whatnot, I think have been severely mismanaged, and her reaction to a lot of the very valid critiques that people have raised both against her reactions and her writing itself have been very negative. I don't know, it's a really sad situation in my opinion that she hasn't kind of taken responsibility for what's happened, because in a lot of her sort of updates she's like saying that she's making these changes and is listening to people, but her actions in my opinion speak differently. Yeah, once again, I hope that Audra is able to learn from this situation. I don't think she will, from what we've seen so far, as like I said, I feel like it's only gotten worse, and I feel like she's just doing the same thing over again with surrounding herself with yes men and doing what she wants to do as opposed to what she should do to make her book better. And I just think that it's going to end in a dumpster fire once again. That's not my hope for what will happen. I hope that she'll realize at some point that this is not the right way to be managing her potential career. That is the note that I'm going to end this video on. I probably have more things to say about this topic that I just didn't fully get out. I do think I have more to say about the kind of publishing second edition. Kind of let me know if any of you are interested in maybe hearing more about that, because I do think that there is a lot more to be said about this kind of recent trend in publishing that I think is a bit concerning. But I did try and keep my comments more relevant to into the actual topic of this video, which is the situation around the Age of Scorpius. But I do hope that you enjoyed this video. Once again, feel free to leave any comments and discussion down below. I know there was a lot of comments and discussion in my last video, and for the most part this was all very nice and well done, and I really enjoyed listening to everyone else's perspectives and critiques and information. But I do ask that people be nice towards both me and Audra and anyone else that I did mention and discuss in this video. Additionally, if you enjoyed this video, potentially consider subscribing to this channel. I personally don't really like including this sort of self-promo bit, but the last video that I did on this situation got quite a lot of views and I did get a lot of subscribers from it, and I am very grateful for anyone who subscribes to my channel and chooses to watch my content. But getting subscribers and likes on the video does help with the algorithm so that it gets to more people, and also helps to let me know what kind of content people want from me moving forward as well. So I would really appreciate that support. And also, if there are any additional kind of topics or commentary videos that you would like to see from me, feel free to leave that down below, or any like advice or suggestions on how to improve on things. Open to criticism, and once again, I think that criticism and critique is a very important part to having any sort of discussion with people, so it's always welcome. Just please frame it nicely. And thank you once again for watching this video and for watching this additional part of me just rambling on about things. Goodbye.